Salespeople should not be prospecting. You ready to have your mind blown? This episode is for you. Hello, Sales Nation, and welcome to today's episode of the Salesman Podcast. On today's show, we have Aaron Ross, author of Predictable Revenue, one of the most important sales books of all time, which has fundamentally changed how Silicon Valley sales startups do sales and selling. And on today's show, he's sharing why salespeople shouldn't prospect. Seems like a crazy thing to say, but we dive into willpower, mindset, the practicalities of it all, and we look into the future as well. There's a lot to go out with this one. And so, well, that said, let's jump right in. Aaron, welcome to the Salesman Podcast.
Yeah. Hey, Will. Thanks. Happy to be here finally. It's been like a year of rescheduling.
It has. You're a very busy guy, and I am totally, how to describe it, back and forth with everything going on that we're doing. I think to put in context for the audience, I think I've asked you to come on numerous times. I've cancelled a few times, and you've stuck in with it. So I really appreciate that. And on today's show, we're going to do it's going to seem counterintuitive, but hopefully by the end of it, it's going to make total sense on why salespeople shouldn't be prospecting. So we'll get practical in some elements of this episode, but the goal of this one is just to give the audience who are working in AE, who are working in BDR roles, who are working in more traditional sales roles, context of the sales industry, where things are heading and why things are heading that way, so they can make more informed decisions when they're looking at jobs and companies and all that good stuff as well. So, jumping straight in the deep end here, Aaron, and I appreciate this is throwing you in the deep end. If prospecting is seemingly so intuitive and so integral to sales, and it has been for hundreds of years, why right now in 2017 should salespeople not be prospecting?
Great question. So, it's interesting. I think when we were just chatting before we started, you point out that a lot of people are new to sales who are starting in prospecting roles, and they may not understand why salespeople shouldn't prospect and like why we're starting to have more of these roles. But you mentioned for hundreds of years, salespeople really would have to do their own prospecting because you'd have some tinker out on the plains, and they had to do it all because there's only them. They go to a town and they're selling snake oil or whatever they're selling. But now it's changed especially the last 10 or 20 years, more and more, is it's possible where it really wasn't before for teams of salespeople to work together in harmony with different kinds of roles, the teamwork. So let me just review 1 second. So when you have these salespeople who are doing everything, right? They're doing their own prospecting, and then they're managing their own sales cycles, closing their own customers, often managing their own customers after that with a book of business, right? Because that was always what people hired. An owner would hire salespeople who could bring in new customers and manage them. What would end up happening is once in a while, someone could do all that. But for the most part, for most people, it's just too much to juggle, like doing their own prospecting. So maybe they can prospect well, but as soon as they get busy with customers or signing new customers, they stop prospecting. Or then they get a bunch of customers who they're managing and they stop prospecting and signing. So they just end up doing lots of things not very well. So what I've seen is companies, when they're building a team of salespeople, they would have a few people who could do all that, because there's 1 out of 10. I'm just making this up, but there's some number of people, but it's a small number that could juggle all these things: prospecting, closing, managing customers, and do it well. But it was rare. And so most people struggled. And what happened is, and I've been probably the number one proponent of this shift and helping inspire it, is when you specialize your sales roles. So salespeople shouldn't prospect. Well, with the caveat that they should prospect to a small number, like 5 or 10 opportunities, like special opportunities, target accounts, or relationships. Most of the bulk of the prospecting or cold prospecting should be done by a junior person in sales who's focused on that, can do it really well. So what happens is when you specialize and you have prospectors who prospect, closers who close, and account managers or customer success that are managing customers, it works much better because people can do fewer things better. Right? Prospectors can get great at prospecting. Closers can be great closing, and so on. So I don't know any sports team in the world where, and there's probably someone, but where every person on the team is doing everything, right? I don't know. In soccer, you've got attackers and defenders and a goalie. So again, this is new for sales to say, wow, we have a sales team of 11. Some should be in attack, like hunting. Some should be in farming, and some should be like to organize them into different roles that work together. And things like Salesforce.com and CRM systems and are making it possible for these sales teams to coordinate in these different roles to work together in harmony rather than sort of stepping on each other's toes all the time. So that's something that has changed in the last 10, 15 years.
And just for further context here, because I'm from the world of the CRM, I don't remember I wasn't working in sales before that point, but what was the equivalent of a CRM before Salesforce, before cloud storage of information?
Well, for, I don't know if it's 20 years before. So Salesforce started around 2000. I started working at Salesforce in 2002. But Salesforce started in 2000. So for maybe 10 or 20 years before that, they had things like Act and Goldmine. It was just contact managers on your computer. Before that, they had the Rolodex. And I don't know how old you have to be to know what a Rolodex is. Truly what a Rolodex, I didn't have one, but it was, basically like a wheel. And you put business cards. Well, you just put the business cards in the wheel and you just, spin it and spin the cards around to find the person. So that was before Act and Goldmine and Salesforce. So I don't know if we're on the third generation or, first generation was paper and then second generation was, contact management, and Salesforce may be third generation if someone wanted to do some sort of fancy post about it.
Because it intrigues me and it fascinates me. And there was one chap at the last company I worked for in medical devices. He'd been with the company for 40 years. So clearly he'd been through each of these stages. And he would always give us a hard time that right now and he would say this kind of 5 years ago to the moment I left, of now is the best time to be in sales because you've got access to all this data. You can have more intelligent conversations and you don't spill coffee over a pile of paperwork and you lose all these interesting facts about your customers. And he would tell these tales of, clearly there was no mobile phones. And he would want to go and see a surgeon, so he would go in, he wouldn't be able to find them. He would go back outside down the road to the payphone with his pound coins, put them in there, trying to get hold of the theatre manager, because clearly the surgeon doesn't have a mobile phone either. And he'd be going back and forth, and it'd be a huge nightmare. Whereas now, and obviously being 30 and being essentially broad, I remember life without the internet. I remember the squeaky dial tones, and I remember MSN Messenger and AIM Messenger trying to chat up girls in high school because that was the easiest way to kind of communicate with them. And I remember life before that. But essentially, my work career, I've always had email on the internet, and now you just text someone and they could ping you back an immediate message of where they are. So it blows my. It sounds crazy to anyone perhaps over a certain age, but for the millennials like myself, it's mental that we didn't have all these technologies to begin with. So with all that said, Aaron, and putting all that into context, so we've got a brief overview of why these shifts are happening. Is this just happening in SaaS, software as a service, or is this happening across all industries, or do you feel like it's going to happen across all industries?
It's happening the fastest in SaaS and technology because technology companies and SaaS tend to be the most aggressive in looking at new ideas that work. That's why SaaS companies tend to be easier to sell to than technology companies, because they're open to new ideas. This should happen, across every industry across the world. Now, in different ways. So the principle here is focus. It's an employee who's doing fewer things better. The way that translates to the business, like for example, in Predictable Revenue, and the newer book From Impossible to Inevitable, I write about 4 core roles. There's inbound lead response if you have inbound leads, outbound prospecting, closing new customers, and account management or customer success. You could have 3 in your business. You might have 3 core roles. You could definitely have more, because you can have lots of different types of closers or lots of different types of prospectors. Enterprise versus mid-market. So the principle is the way you apply it is about your business. How it works is, how can I, what needs to happen, and how do I have more types of jobs in sales so people can do fewer things better. So you still got to be smart about your business, but it really should be anywhere in sales. Now in B2B sales, because if you sell to consumers, or really simple sales, where you might be, 1 call, 2 call, 3 calls to close, or fast sales cycles, there is a point where it doesn't make sense to have, like say a junior salesperson doing the first calls and someone else closing. So again, you gotta be smart, but there's no reason why it shouldn't change how companies everywhere, every industry in B2B are doing how they structure their sales teams.
Well, just on that, Aaron, and you can tell me if you agree or you don't agree in this perhaps, but I'm constantly banging onto the audience that if they're on a sales process, if they're using a sales process that requires 2 phone calls to close a deal, they should probably look for a new job as soon as possible, because it's probably not going to exist in the not too distant future. You know, the role might turn from a commission sales role into customer success or something like that. But tell me if I'm right or wrong here, because I don't. It's my gut on this as well as some data, but I really encourage the audience to get into the complex B2B sales roles. Perhaps should we even be sussing out what companies are progressive and thinking ahead and looking for these AE roles or closer roles? Are they the most secure moving forward, perhaps?
Yeah, actually, I hadn't thought about it that way, but I think that's a really good point. If it's a simple sale, it's a 1-2 calls, it means it's probably not that far, like you said, from moving it towards some sort of order taking, or you as a person, because you don't have, how to put this is, if it's a simple sale, it's probably simpler to replace you with someone else, unless you are just a natural. So the more secure roles in sales, again, there's more training, more steps, it's more complexity, so you need to be better at it, which means it's harder to replace you.
Are certain people better in these roles than others? Are some people designed and destined to be the person doing the outreach versus an account manager? Or, because as you said at the top of the show, I think there's 2 elements to this. We can only focus on one thing at a time. Some of us are better than other things than others. Or is it that doing the whole process itself doesn't work very well because it's difficult to focus at one thing at a time and we can't multitask, if that makes sense? Is it because most people have a natural talent to one element of it, or is it because we're just overwhelmed trying to do the whole thing?
It's a little bit of both. So first, I think the main issue is overwhelm. The main issue is people are trying to not only juggle too many things, but these different jobs have different rhythms. So let me give you an example. A lot of companies, even though they break out sort of the junior sales roles, often called sales development or sales development reps, from closers or account executives, but they have these sales development reps do 2 things. They're juggling responding to inbound leads. So they have like what's called one person, and this one person is supposed to respond to some inbound leads coming through the website, plus do some outbound prospecting. Okay. And these 2 things don't mix, because they're different rhythms. So it's this overwhelm, plus, responding to an inbound lead is, like a minutes to an hour to 24-hour kind of response cycle time. Outbound prospecting is a much slower, weeks cycle time. So it's just, they don't mix. It's like oil and water. Unless, for example, if I'm doing outbound prospecting, then 10%, a very small part of my job is some other thing I got to do, right? So it's small, I can do it. It's not a distraction to me. That's really part of this. Now, people do have a natural proclivity towards, I like hunting, I like prospecting, or I like farming, or I like taking care of customers, or I like the thrill of signing a new customer. So there's that as part of it, but it's a much smaller part than this sort of overwhelm, cycle issue that people deal with. This is why it doesn't work. This is why the number one thing, if you're not specializing your salespeople, the number one thing that will make the biggest difference in your business is specializing, because it's like a structural change. You don't want to rely on willpower. That's not, sustainable. Having a structural change, where prospectors prospect and closers close and so on, is something that will fundamentally change your business and make it more scalable.
Willpower, it's funny you should say that, Aaron, because willpower was what is in my head as you described in that example of, if you go even worse perhaps, to the medical devices of, I was prospecting, I was managing inbound leads that were sent to me indirectly through the website. I was also doing customer service, essentially customer success. I was training customers after the fact. So I was doing all of this. And my willpower the morning, no matter what hip hop I've been listening to, no matter how pumped up I was, no matter how well rested I was, I could only reply to emails that were incoming quickly at the beginning of the morning, the beginning of the day. By the end of the evening, it was the willpower and how to describe it. I was almost every single time at that point, I'd get an email that I'll just do it tomorrow. It was I depleted my ability to, because clearly we can't multitask physically. I depleted my ability to stop what I was doing, to switch focus, to focus on something else and switch back. Clearly, that isn't an efficient way to go about things in any regards at all when you're looking at productivity. But in the morning, I had the ability to do that. In the evening, I was just shot. So my surgeons knew this. So then they would start piling on the questions and the emails and the text first thing in the morning. And I find that I just wasn't getting anything done because you'd be fighting fires as opposed to being proactive first thing. So I guess all this counteracts some of that as well, right?
Exactly. Yeah. It lets people, focusing in on doing fewer things better. So they're better at their job. They're more organized. It's also faster and easier to hire people and train them and ramp them. And even better is it creates, when you do this, you can create a farm team system in your company where you can hire junior people who have a lot of potential, and they start off with like managing those inbound leads or prospecting. They get promoted to sales usually, right? So you have a very high success rate with your salespeople because by the time you do these internal promotions, they already know your company and customers. They know the systems, you know them, and they should already have some kind of pipeline to walk into. So one of the things that we point out, myself and my co-author Jason Lemkin in the new book that's From Impossible to Inevitable book, is that the average sales team attrition per year in the States, which means the percentage of your sales team that gets lost, whether they quit or are fired, it's almost 30%. So I think it's like 27%. So out of 100 salespeople per year, 27 leave. It should be less than 10%.
And Aaron, what is that? You may not know off the top of your head, but for like marketing or finance, what's the kind of attrition rate in those spaces?
It's a lot less. In marketing, it's hard to say. It's a lot less. Sales is the highest. But let me put it this way. If you were at a company at a board and you said, we have 100 engineers and we lost 27% this year, that would be that would be a catastrophe. And in sales, people are just used to it. It's a catastrophe because people don't realize, they're just not used to thinking of it as a catastrophe and how expensive it is. Anyone who used to be a customer of Salesforce for many years, you could hear them. They're like, every few months we were changing, salespeople. Like, what a pain in my ass. Like new people coming in. And so anyway, there's like lost opportunity cost and so on. It's a huge cost, but it should be a lot lower, much, much lower.
Okay. So Aaron, I think we've given a good overview for everyone who's moving into a new sales role, everyone who is in a role which is becoming split, because clearly this is happening to established spaces at the moment. I think we've given them an overview of this. But what can we do for the B2B sales professionals? And this may be off the beaten track for you, I'm not sure, but what can we do for the B2B sales professionals that do have to do it all? Is there any way, I'm not necessarily talking about outsourcing your lead generation to China or Eastern Europe, where you can perhaps there's companies there that can email people on your behalf, because I think your sales manager is going to be pissed if you start doing that. But is there any way that we can start structuring the day of the individuals who don't have the opportunity to split and specialize? Is there anything that we can do to make their lives more efficient?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, because there's a lot of people and a lot of people listening who are going to be at a company and they're like, my boss or this company is never going to, do this. And here I am in my sales job, and I don't, I got a prospect because that's just my job is today. So whether you're that kind of salesperson or whether you're an entrepreneur and there's one of you or three of you, and what you start with is specializing your time, right? You have to block out blocks of time for whatever it is you're not getting to. So if the main thing you're not getting to is prospecting, or if the main thing you're not getting to is calling on and talking to your current customers, whatever that is, so you block it out. So if it's Monday, Wednesday, Friday from 2 to 4, for me, for example, now I have 9 kids. Writing a new book is impossible when you have 9 kids, but I was able to do it because I blocked out Wednesdays just to write. And it took me a while, but I blocked out a whole day. Now, I'm a whole day kind of person, but you might do. So block out time, have a buddy if you can, right? An accountability buddy, and just have some weekly goals or daily goals. It's like adopting a new diet or some other kind of life change. You need to hold yourself accountable. You need to have some goals. You need to have some structure so you can focus on it. Prospecting, for example, you can't do that in 5 minutes at a time. You need like 90 minutes, an hour or 2 hours in blocks. but that's the way you begin, even if you can't have other people do it for you.
Should our whole day be set up like this? And I go back and forth on this. Clearly, there's value in being able to be reactive to certain scenarios. You've gone to tender and someone drops out, and you're now the head of the pecking order when you didn't think you were, as just an off the head scenario. But clearly, there's value to be added to customers by being able to quickly respond and being reactive. But then the other side of me thinks perhaps down the predictable revenue model of statistically over time, if you're just bang on with the process and you believe in your sales process and statistically it works, then perhaps you should spend 2 hours each morning prospecting, 2 hours following up with customer success, the kind of early lunchtime doing something else, and then wrapping up with something that's perhaps uses less willpower or brain power, but it's still useful at the end of the day. Is that something that salespeople should be doing with their time? Just forgetting this whole conversation, just doing that in general.
It is helpful to have a weekly and daily structure. But if you're in inside sales, it's a lot more possible than if you're in field sales. So everyone is so different. The way, what works for you is so different. For example, right now, again, huge family, my schedules are changing every week because there's summer and there's different camps and school starts and we're going on a trip. And then, so you sort of have to have this idea of having your time and what's important and how do you, make sure things are getting done, but also be flexible and understand some of you can have very predictable schedules and some can't, and you got to be able to go with the flow as well. So call it chaotic predictability.
and how much, and just to dwell on this point, yeah, perfect. Just to dwell on this point a little bit further, because now we're diving into the mindset of it all. How many people do you believe that tell you it's so unpredictable, it's so mental, and get pulled each way, one way from the other? How many of them can have a predictable work life if they tried, versus how many truly need it to be unpredictable, if that makes sense?
Yeah. Oh man, you're going deep. Well, it's interesting because, again, there's this paradox where if you're in a sales job, you can have a lot more predictability if you're in a current sales job. I guarantee. So however that looks to you, whether for most companies or for most salespeople, if you have more predictable leads, that will lead you to more predictable sales. Because that's usually the growth lever, and that's usually the source of a lot of the unpredictability is, I don't know how many appointments I'll get this month. So that's usually the place to start. So in other words, you can make your current job more predictable. But there's this weird thing where if you want to make your career more predictable, how I say it requires, I think, chaos to make your career predictable, because you can't, like you said, you can't predict where these leaps will happen. Something happens and suddenly there's an opening and you get promoted, or someone recruits you. So in that case, it's really the best you can do in your current job, and to keep learning. I mean, I think of what it's easy to lose sight of is what interests you, what drives you, and what creates the long-term career success are things like learning and relationships. How much are you learning day to day, week to week, month to month? Are you, meeting new people, or are you building stronger relationships? Are you developing an expertise that you're known for? Like, those are the things that can get lost in the day-to-day hustle, just making quota month to month. So whatever you need to do to not lose sight of relationships, learning, and expertise is going to help you with that, the chaotic career progressions that come in fits and starts.
Yeah, I guess you could call it chaotic, or it could just be perhaps a more positive spin on that. It's just the opportunities that you crop up. There's a formula for luck. I can't remember off the top of my head, but essentially opportunity meets preparedness, something like that. And I guess that sums it up.
It's like, sweat, being prepared plus luck equals opportunity.
Yeah.
Something like that. Sweat plus luck equals opportunity.
But I think you're spot on here, and I think it's worth going over, and I don't want to gloss over it. Of the stress I've had in sales has been because my pipeline isn't full. Then you get this weird paradox of people are more difficult to do deals with when you've got this smell of desperation around you, versus what I have with the podcast. I'm very kind of lucky. Well, some luck, some hard work to achieve it, but we're oversubscribed. We're always oversubscribed for the number of sponsors that we can have. Clearly, we only put out so many episodes, so we can only have so many partnership, sponsorship slots for different companies that we work with. And so when someone wants to speak with me about a potential sponsorship, I wouldn't say I'm laissez-faire. I want the deal, and I'm, be assertive to make it happen if it's a good fit for everyone involved. But if it doesn't happen, I'm just kind of like, well, that's okay. It's your loss. And that then encourages people to come and work even harder to almost win my attention from it. And you mentioned kids. I've noticed this with children as well. I've got one mate. He'll never listens to the show, but if he did, he'd know who exactly what I'm talking about now. He is super. He's a primary school teacher, so now he definitely knows who I'm talking about. But he's super attentive with kids. He gives them all of his attention. He's all over them. They love it. But when I hang out with him and there's a child in the room, they always end up wanting to hang out with me because I'm always kind of like, yeah, whatever, I'm not bothered. And then they're striving for my attention. So I guess it's a similar kind of dynamic there of if something comes too easy in a relationship, I guess it gives it less value. So I'm not saying that we should all turn around and be arseholes to our customers so that to encourage them to want to come back and spend time with us. But I think there's an element here of stress reduction for sure by making sure that your pipeline is full from the very beginning, right?
Yeah, there's you're right. Well, if people and trust me with kids, I've learned too, and myself, if something comes too easy, you take it for granted. It's just different than customer service. So you can be sort of so attentive to customers that then they start to assume that and take it for granted. But I think, in this weird life level where we want instant success, we want to make more money, we want to be more famous. But the thing is, like, if it comes in this weird way, if it comes too easy, you don't really appreciate it. So in other words, a lot of your life happiness is defined by what you grow up with. And if it's easy to say, hey, we don't appreciate all the food and water we get because we grew up with it. But if you lived in most of the world where you don't have lots of food and water, you would be incredibly grateful for just being in your shoes right now. So you can't, it's like, it's just words. So you can't really, you don't change your happiness through thinking, really. You change it through experiences. And the struggle, when I did this basically 28-day desert survival trip years ago, where you're out with like a knife and one set of clothes and no sleeping bag, no fire. And so the first few days we get no food, right? So say the world's best banana is really simple. First, you don't eat for 3 days and then you have banana. It's like the most amazing thing you've ever eaten. So it's this weird paradox in life where happiness also comes from being unhappy. It's like that lack of something and then you get it creates more happiness. So I don't know, like the older I get and the more I know, the less I feel like I know. But I will say is that a lot of people in sales, a lot of people in business, in our culture, we get comfortable with what we're doing. And success, like comfort is the enemy of growth. And we're tired and we're stressed out and we've got kids. And so it's hard to take that decision to change things, to get uncomfortable, to take the new job or more responsibility or new company or another kid or whatever, or getting married if that's scary to you, whatever that change is. But to grow requires to be uncomfortable. It's like by definition, there's a thing that you're scared of or nervous about jumping into. But that's probably what will drive you towards more personal or career growth. Right? So in other words, that's a whole section of the new book. It's that comfort is the enemy of growth. If you're always comfortable, then you're not growing. And with companies, the faster a company grows, the more things break. So to some extent, to be able to grow faster as a person or company requires you to be able to deal with more chaos and more unhappiness sort of day by day.
Well,
that makes sense.
It makes total sense. And I think we've probably just lost half the audience in that they've gone, sod it, Aaron, makes total sense. I'm starting that business or I'm going traveling or I'm doing whatever. Clearly, I'm joking, but I think we should do that. I think that it should be encouraged. But something that, as you're saying that, Aaron, it comes to me of, I feel like, and this could be a positive or a negative depending on how you want to look at it. But when I feel comfortable, I feel like I'm at risk. I feel like someone could potentially swipe whatever I've got from underneath me. And it's only when I'm uncomfortable that I feel like I've got the opportunity to thrive. It's only when I'm uncomfortable, whether that be in a sales role, when I have taken a slightly different path or route, and I'm trying something new. And I had this in the last job that I had. I was constantly banging on for the company to. I've talked about this on the show before. I could have been doing a medical device podcast whilst employed for this previous company, and it probably would have had 1,000 downloads from urologists in the UK and the US, and that would have made them a ton of money because it would add so much attention each week. And it was the lack of flexibility, their lack of predicting things forward. And I really believe there's still that I could potentially still have been working there and putting all my effort into growing something for someone else, essentially. And it was their lack of vision that forced me to be uncomfortable in the job, which then made me take to have comfort in the growth of growing my own business. Long story short. And so yeah, I encourage the audience that if that pulled on anyone's heartstrings or give you a punch in the gut, and there's something that it's talked about in numerous kind of books and models of having a shadow career. So you're in sales because you actually want to run a business, but you're not ready to take that leap. Things like that. I encourage the audience to kind of pull the finger out and have a good go at it. But there's one thing, Aaron, that I want to wrap up the show with. And I feel like you potentially got your finger on the pulse of this and we'll be able to give unique insights on it. And that is moving forward, whether it's 24 months, 5 years, 10 years, these roles are obviously going to kind of even branch out and get even more narrow niche, I imagine.
Yep,
But,
and expand.
And for sure, and it'll be even vertical specific or even account specific, I'm sure. Is there any technology that's going to come along that's going to disrupt all this? And it's seemingly from the SDR perspective, there's lots of bots, there's lots of essentially tools to convert an inbound lead into a meeting that seems ready and ripe to disrupt this kind of role of having an actual person go back and forth and book meetings.
Yes, I mean, there's so many apps and there's so many bots and there's so many ways to try to reduce a lot of the busy work in sales, whether you're an inbound lead response or outbound prospecting. So what I see specifically in outbound prospecting, and again, because we have trained, we have this thing called Predictable University, which trains prospectors and salespeople how to prospect. Most of what I believe is going to happen, and this is probably true with marketing or sales, and there's always going to be new bots and apps to help reduce the legwork and manual work in your job. And what that does is it just means that going back to like that person who's doing simpler sales, the kinds of jobs that are at risk are going to be, you're doing more manual labor, data entry, and so you sort of have fewer of these menial-ish jobs, and you have more demand for jobs that really require thought and expertise and knowledge and problem solving. So the prospectors of the future, because the AI bots and things will automate a lot of prospecting, like data and basic emails, but what you can't replace, and this is where we see even today so many people falling short, is who's the right kind of customer who really needs this? How do I find them? How do I start a conversation with them? How do I communicate them in a way that they appreciate it and they understand my value? How do I understand a company? So there's the headquarters, there's divisions, there's different people. How do I, get people excited? How do I get the right people on board? All those kinds of questions, and whether you call it a knowledge worker or whether you call it a consultative sale, it just means that there's going to be more and more demand for smart people who use their brains and are able to basically sell in whatever the label is. Like sales is a life skill. That is not going to be automated. So whether you're an entrepreneur, whether you want to start a nonprofit, you can't accomplish anything in life without selling yourself, a product or an idea. JFK sold us on going to the moon. Mother Teresa, Elon Musk, incredible salespeople. So that part of the job, let's call it to sell, is not going to be automated. Some of the menial legwork might be. So there's going to be more and more sales jobs. So last thing, I think there's some report that says the B2B sales professionals, job is going to go away in 5 to 10 years because of buyers have more information, and I think Forrester put it out, and which is total bullshit. Because again, the roles will change, but the need for people who can sell to other people is going to be ever increasing, because that is what helps buyers and us sort through all the noise to, people want to buy from other people. So that human connection, you're helping me. You're telling me what I can do. How do I do it? And helping improve my business. That's not going to go away. Never will.
What's interesting about what you just said there, Aaron, was that JFK, Elon Musk, all these people that we look up to don't follow the stereotype of the slimy car salesperson, which is clearly what we're trying to move away from. And so it's interesting to me that as I bought a car recently, I've talked about it on the show. I didn't need that salesperson to be there. Like, it was a BMW. I researched everything. He literally was just in there to make sure that I didn't wrap the car around a tree on on the test drive. That was literally the only reason he was there. He's a very nice chap, and he knew that he'd won the deal as soon as I stepped into the car, because it was what I was looking for, and it had kind of all the specs I wanted. But that, I think the role where, and he was a good guy, but the role where someone could be potentially a slimy salesperson is going to disappear. And hopefully it just leaves, maybe not JFK's and Elon Musk's, there'll be some room down below for the rest of us, myself included. But I think that could really change the face of sales. Maybe it'll be called something else. But that's really intriguing me to me looking forward. And with that, Aaron, I've got one question, mate, to ask everyone that comes on the show. And that is, if you could go back in time and speak to your younger self, what would be the one piece of advice you'd give him to help him become better at selling?
It's a great question. And I think that probably to understand that selling, a lot of it, I mean, of course, there are natural people who are natural, just like there's naturals at playing guitar. But most of the people who are great at selling, most of the ability to sell comes from, you can be trained, can be learned, and can be practiced. And it comes from this place of wanting to help people, wanting to help inspire them to be different, and learning the techniques to do that in a way which is good for them and good for you at the same time. So to learn the craft of selling, and also understand why it's so important to accomplish anything significant in life, whether also getting married, starting a business, starting a nonprofit, really anything. It's a life skill.
Love it. I totally agree. I think there is a spark perhaps of how to describe it, of your genes, of you having to, as we were talking about before, you fit into a certain role. Perhaps you're just great and extroverted and can talk to people. But I'm somewhat introverted. I will do this interview now, kind of wave my arms around in front of 20,000 people that are going to watch and listen to this. But I'm going to go, and this is the fourth interview of the day, and I need a little break now before I go and do some more later on, because it really drains me speaking to people. And I like telling this anecdote because there's plenty of salespeople that listen to the show, think I'm this crazy, extroverted, skinny 30-year-old dude waving his arms around, and they don't get the subtlety of it, of I can do that, but it takes energy from me and I have to recover from after the fact. So
you're like,
yeah.
Actually, I'm a crazy introverted 30-year-old skinny, waving my skinny arms around.
Love it.
Yeah. I was always an introvert as well. So, but also one thing that changes when you find things you care about, that can helps you. If you really care about what's the product you're selling, an idea, that changes people too.
Makes total sense. With that, Aaron, you've mentioned the books, but tell us a little bit more about them, where we can find them, and then I think for the reasonably substantial amount of directors, VPs, and C-suite that listen to the show, who are starting to get a bit more vocal in the comments on LinkedIn, which I appreciate. Tell us a little bit about the consulting side of things as well.
Well, the book I'm I think I should have one here, most famous for still is Predictable Revenue. There's a new one out called From Impossible to Inevitable, but Predictable Revenue is the one that's really changed things and called the Sales Bible for Silicon Valley now, predictablerevenue.com. And, my specialty, my company's specialty is helping companies be successful at outbound prospecting. So a lot of what we do is helping companies build outbound prospecting teams that are successful and basically having the highest chance of success in driving faster growth with more predictable outbound lead generation. So predictablerevenue.com.
Good stuff. Well, I'll link to all of that in the show notes to this episode over at salesmanpodcast.com. With that, Aaron, I want to thank you for your time. I want to thank you for we covered a lot of ground here, mate. we went from the practical to looking into the future of sales to get into the mindset side of things. So I appreciate you coming on board and coming along that ride. I really do, mate. And with that, I want to thank you for joining us on the Salesman Podcast.
Yeah, well, hey, thanks again. I'm glad we finally made this happen.